I should start my stream the same way I start my YouTube videos. Hello, beautiful people. I hope you're all having a great day. So today, we're gonna be doing Ask Zajef number 2. We're gonna go through the questions that we received as comments on the Ask Zajef number 1 video, which, if you haven't seen, is on the YouTube. A few guidelines for the questions that I will answer versus won't answer. I don't really want to address power levels in these question sessions. When you talk about power level, it will influence people's wishing decisions, and that's gonna lead to obviously people making decisions based on what you say. On Twitch, the people here have the full context for the things I say. But if you include full context in a YouTube video, it's going to end up being too long. So I don't want people to misinterpret what I say in a YouTube video and make decisions on what units to pull based on that. So I'm not gonna talk about power level, or at least I'm mostly not gonna talk about power level. That means for those of you on YouTube, if you got a question about power level, check the link in the description for the Twitch channel. So we have 21 replies to the pinned comment with questions. Question number 1. Can you go over Xiao's plunges and when to low and high plunge? Sure. Yeah, usually it doesn't really matter which combo you do, because they're all very similar. The main thing that's gonna affect what combo you decide to do isn't which combo deals the more DPS, it's which combo works the best in a specific situation. When you consider the timing on it, which is gonna change when you dodge, like by jumping, and when you consider the stagger. So here, I would have fucked it up. But you can do something like that. Right? And just make sure that whatever combo you're using ends with you in the air when the enemy is attacking you, which is gonna make it so that you don't get hit. Many people struggle with not dying on Xiao and feel the need to use Zhongli, and that's mainly because people often don't do this. I fucked it up there. My bad. Yeah, obviously I'm not perfect, but that's the general idea. You try to choose whichever combo to use based on what attacks the enemy is doing, and you use your different combos to delay your jump to whenever the enemy is attacking you. If you find yourself in a situation where you're not worried about dodging and you're against an enemy like a Ruin Guard that has a very large hitbox, a thing that you might not know is that you can actually hit the enemies midair with your plunge on Xiao. Right, as you can see, 747 and 1900. Oh, nine, yeah. Right, 600, 1200, 600, 1200, right? Oops, I missed it there, right? There's two different numbers on the screen. 600 and 1300. That's what people generally call the collision plunge, or I like to call it the bonk. And the bonk is only possible on certain enemies that have larger hitboxes, but it makes it so that it's basically an on-hit effect, right? It's additional damage on each plunge, and whether you do a high plunge or a low plunge, it's the same amount of damage. And so if you're in a situation where you don't need to change your attacks based on timing to dodge, you can just spam a low plunge so that your on-hit is applied more often, right? That collision plunge happens more often. Do I think running Lion's Roar on Xingqiu with attack sands ER around 120 with Favonius, Raiden, and National would be a DPS increase? Honestly, that's a good question. I haven't really looked at Irrational Team damage distribution enough to be able to give you a good answer. I'm not sure if it would be a DPS increase, but it definitely would be more comfortable. Fav weapons are just they feel so comfortable to play. But generally, Raiden is contributing a higher portion of the damage than Xingqiu, because Xingqiu doesn't snapshot Bennett's buff, so you end up losing out on a lot of the buffs on your team. But I'm not sure if that changes at high constellation Xingqiu. I don't believe it does. In Mr. Sock's recent Ganyu video, my weapon comparison for Freeze Ganyu said that Polar Star would bet less than slotted if crit rate is overcapped by less than 10%. What that means is, my brain is not functioning today. I'm sorry, chat. Basically, you get a lot of crit rate from Lizard Strayer, from Fire Resonance, right? And then you're probably gonna have a little bit on your substats as well. And then your weapon gives you 33% with Polar Star. And so what ends up happening is you're gonna be over 100% crit rate, like basically no matter what. Now the question is, by how much are you over 100% crit rate? If you're like a little bit over 100% crit rate with your Polar Star, well, the Polar Star passive is good enough that it's still gonna be the best weapon. But if you're a lot over 100% crit rate, and you got like 130% crit rate, where like all of your crit rate on your weapon is not doing anything, then it's not a very good weapon. That's basically what that means. What Blackcliff weapons are worth getting? Okay, that's actually a good question. The best way to look at Blackcliff weapons is guaranteed replacement for gacha options. What I mean by that is, if the free-to-play blacksmith weapon is not very good on a character, you're generally going to want one of the gacha weapons. But at the end of the day, unless you're going for a 5-star with like the epitomized path, you cannot guarantee a specific weapon. There's no pity counter on like which weapon you get. If you wish on this banner trying to get a Favonius sword, you could go 2,000 wishes without getting a single Favonius sword, right? There's no hard guarantee on any of the 4-star weapons. There's no epitomized path for those 4-star weapons. And because of that, what's gonna end up happening is it's very possible you're in a situation where you don't have a good gacha weapon for one of your characters. That's the main situation when Blackcliff weapons are good. Now, because some free-to-play weapons are very good, on a lot of weapon types, the increase from the free-to-play weapon to the Blackcliff weapons is very small and not really worth doing. Right? So namely, if we go to this, right? The Blackcliff Warbow can be fine, but if either you're using the Hamayumi passive, aka you're doing normal and charge attacks for your damage, it's not really better. And if you're comparing it to Crescent, if you get an aim shot on the weak point on Crescent, Crescent is significantly better than Blackcliff. So Blackcliff Warbow will basically never be something you want to get. Blackcliff Agate is like weird because it's a fine weapon, and there's not, like, the free-to-play catalysts aren't very good for like damage dealers, but also there's not really any good damage dealer catalysts, right? Like, what damage dealer catalysts are there? There's Ningguang, there's Klee, there's who else? Yanfei. Is there anyone else? Sugos. I mean, Sugos technically is a damage dealer, but she's a damage dealer that doesn't scale with crit stats, so Blackcliff Agate is not good on her. Yeah, there's those three basically. But on both Klee and Yanfei, Mappamare is like pretty good. And even on Ningguang, Mappamare is not too bad because it's high base attack, low substat, so the fact that it's a useless substat doesn't matter as much. And like, it's basically only for Ningguang. But like, even then, you can just get a Frostbearer and it's like, it's not a significant increase, right? Blackcliff Slasher, Prototype Archaic is pretty good, and it's just not significantly better, so it's rarely going to be better. So that leaves us with Blackcliff Pole and Blackcliff Longsword, which are the two Blackcliff weapons that I think you might have situations on your account where that's worth going for. Blackcliff Pole is not worth getting on someone like a Xiangling. Basically only on Xiao. It's a pretty good weapon because Xiao's free-to-play options are pretty bad. And on top of that, most of his 4-star gacha weapons are also bad. Right, the Leeway Spear is pretty good, the Lithic Spear, but as far as I remember, the other gacha 4-stars are like dog shit on him. I mean, technically Favonius can work in certain team comps, but we're not talking about that. Right, so generally it's either Blackcliff, Deathmatch, or Lithic for the 4-star weapons. Lithic cannot be obtained through the standard banner. It's only through the weapon banner, and so it's very possible that you don't have it. And Deathmatch is a battle pass weapon. So Blackcliff Pole ends up being a pretty decent option for Xiao only. Hu Tao too. Blackcliff Pole isn't very good on Hu Tao. It's not a significant upgrade over White Tassel. I don't even remember if it is an upgrade over White Tassel. I have a sheet for Hu Tao somewhere. I can find it. According to J Stern's guide, Blackcliff with 1 stack is similar to White Tassel. Yeah, I'll take a look at my sheet as well. The reason why White Tassel is good on Hu Tao is because she doesn't need high base attack, because all of her attack, or most of her attack, comes from her E that converts her HP to attack. And there's technically a cap based on your base attack, but you never reach that cap in realistic scenarios, so it doesn't matter. Right, so you don't need a high base attack weapon, which means that White Tassel is actually pretty good. Yeah, it looks pretty similar. It's like a 3% difference. So that's it for the Blackcliff Pole. It's basically just a Xiao weapon if you don't have Deathmatch or Lithic or a 5-star. Blackcliff Longsword is my favorite. It's the only Blackcliff weapon I own on my account. But with the release of Amenoma, it's a lot worse than it used to be. Not because its like power went down, but because its value went down from good free-to-play weapon being released, right? The Amenoma sword is really good on most of the characters that would have wanted Blackcliff Longsword. The characters that would have wanted Blackcliff Longsword are Kaya in a freeze team, Ayaka in a freeze team, Bennett because it has a high base attack. Is there anyone else I'm missing? Jean? Yeah, I guess Jean. But it's rarely better than Fab on Jean. But I guess it's still fine. But no, you'd want Aminoma over this on Jean. Yeah, okay, but yeah, it would have been good on Jean if Aminoma hadn't been released, right? But now, with Aminoma's generally better than Blackcliff on Kaya, on Ayaka, and on Jean, right? There's going to be situations where Blackcliff is slightly better, namely if you can get stacks on it for Kaya and Ayaka, but like, it's not by much, and it's definitely not worth spending 24-star glitter for. Bennett is like the only remaining scenario, but even then, the reason why Blackcliff Longsword is good on Bennett is because it has the same base attack as Prototype Rancor, but it has an actual useful substat, which is crit. But even then, most of the time your Bennett isn't doing a significant portion of your team's damage, so there's just not much of a point. It's still a fine weapon to get. Like, I use mine all the time, but I also don't have Aminoma. I would probably not use it nearly as much if I had an Aminoma. Honestly, because of the Inazuma weapons, they're kind of not really that good. Blackcliff Pole still has a niche where it's good, but the others are generally things you want to stay away from. How much EM should I have for Melt Ganyu? Calculated that EM is better than crit value until around 180 to 190 EM and wanted to confirm. Thanks. That sounds right. Let's double check that, shall we? That does sound more or less accurate. Alright, so when you look at the crit value you have, for those of you who are watching on YouTube and don't know what crit value and crit multiplier are, you can feel free to go take a look at the last video. Let's say you're starting at around 150 crit value. Crit value is this square divided by 8 plus 1. This plus 6.6, 1 roll's worth of crit value. Let's stop at 100 crit rate to 200 crit damage. Right, the damage increase is around 2. Generally, it goes up to like around 2.30 something percent. Caps out at around 280, and then it goes back down. So the damage increase from 1 roll of crit is gonna be around between 2 and 2.3% damage. Now, the damage increase from 1 roll of EM. So we got EM multiplier. So EM starts at 0. EM multiplier is equal to 1 plus 25 divided by 9, multiplied by EM divided by 141 plus EM. That's a formula that the game decided. It's an arbitrary formula. 1 roll of EM gets you to 20. Your multiplier goes to this, and then there we go. So the cutoff point does seem to be at around 190-ish, right? Where it goes to 2.3. Characters like Melt Ganyu, not characters like Melt Ganyu, Melt Ganyu specifically, melts all of her damage, right? The only thing that she doesn't melt generally is like her E, which is such a small portion of her damage that you can basically ignore it. And so all the relevant damage that's being done, you're gonna melt, which means that EM is very good. The damage increase from 1 roll of EM, as you can see, starts at around 4%, which is massive, and it slowly goes down over time. Are you supposed to not burst on Melt Ganyu? Generally, yeah. There are situations where you can burst, specifically when you play Ganyu with Sunfire Jane, which is a thing I'm gonna cover in my video on elemental reactions. We've done some work on it. We're getting closer to it being done, so you can probably look forward to it being on the channel in the next like month and a half, hopefully. But yeah, Shenling's burst and Kazuha's burst basically apply 1-ish unit of pyro, which is enough to melt 1 charge shot, right? The arrow plus the bloom, and that's it. Whereas the Sunfire proc from Jean plus Bennett applies 2 units of pyro-ish, 2-ish units of pyro, which is enough for 4 melts. With the way that it decays over time, you're probably gonna get 3. But basically what that does is it makes it so that your icicles aren't gonna steal away your melts from your charge shots. Because that's what generally happens if you use burst on Melt Ganyu but not with Sunfire, is your icicles are gonna steal the aura and is gonna make it so that your bloom, which is the biggest part of your damage, isn't melting, which is very bad. Sunfire Melt Ganyu is better. I'm not saying it's better. I don't know if it's better, because the thing about Sunfire Melt Ganyu is it's so fucking painful to play that I don't know if anyone's done the calcs on it. The initial question was, how much EM should you have for Melt Ganyu? So yes, just like you calculated, EM is better than crit value until around 200. But that doesn't mean that you want to go to 200 and then stop. The reality of how stats work in this game is you don't choose which stats you have. Or rather, you can try to choose which stats you have, but you're gonna still be at the mercy of RNG, at least to some extent, right? If you look at a piece like... Okay, actually, that's a great example, right? So this is an attack sense with EM, crit, right? I personally would have liked it a little bit better if it rolled into crit rate and crit damage a bit more, because it would be more versatile, right? Could use it on characters that don't want EM. But this is still very good, right? There's 3 rolls of elemental mastery there, which, like, it's a lot of stats. And what many people often fail to realize is that, yeah, sometimes some stats are going to be better than others, but just because you have the better stats doesn't mean you have the better artifact, because you also need to have a lot of those stats, right? You have up to 9 substat rolls on each artifact, because they can start with either 3 or 4, but if they start with 4, you level them to 20, which is plus 4 5 times, so that's 5 additional substats, right? So you can get up to 9 substats. Yeah, if you get double crit, that's great. But if you got double crit on an 8 substat because it started with 3, where a few of the rolls went into something that isn't crit, versus if you have something like... Actually, I have the perfect artifact to showcase this on my free-to-play account. It's not a great artifact. It's a good artifact. It's the circlet I'm using on my Singto. Yeah, right? Obviously, I would have rathered if this hit crit damage 4 times instead of attack 4 times, right? But that's 20% attack. This is very fucking good. If we look at Singcho's total stats, he's got 1832 total attack, 1832, crit rate, crit damage. 57% crit rate, 106% crit damage, right? For an effective attack from his attack and crit of attack times 1 plus crit rate times crit damage. If I were to replace a bunch of these attack rolls, to remove a bunch of these attack rolls, right? Let's take a look at how much worse it would be. So I lose 21.6% of 656. So 21.6% of these stay the same, right? So I'd be quite a bit worse. So let's say instead of 106% crit rate, I gain 1 roll of crit rate, of crit damage, sorry. Well, it's still worse. What about 2 rolls of crit damage? Still worse. What about 3 rolls of crit damage? That is... There we go. Still worse. I would need 4 rolls of crit damage, average rolls of crit damage, for it to be better. That's a lot of fucking rolls. This means that as of right now, right, when you compare it to 3 rolls of crit damage, this piece is better. So this piece that has attack that's arguably a worse stat than crit is better than if the artifact had 7.8% plus 6.6% times 3. It's better than if it had 28% crit damage and no attack. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because that applies to all characters. That applies to Ganyu. Even though on Melt Ganyu, specifically, her EM is better than crit before 200 and slightly worse after 200, there's still gonna be situations where the artifacts that you have available to you on your account, the best possible option has like 350 EM, just because the good artifacts that you have a lot of EM, right? It may be a little bit too much EM, quote unquote too much EM, but it's like 3 rolls of EM versus 1 roll of crit in terms of what your options are. And that's a reality that people miss way too fucking often, and they end up just only going for crit value, only going for crit rate, crit damage, making sure their crit ratio is good, and then they end up overlooking a really good artifact. And so to the question, how much EM should I have for Melt Ganyu? It depends on what artifacts you have available for your account. The best way to be 100% certain of which things to go for is to use an artifact optimizer. Like, which artifacts to use is to use an artifact optimizer.